Welcome. I'm Kinetic Symphony. I hunt down and report on mysterious and weird, true stories, from glitches to the paranormal. Bonus file, written by AveryMatthews. The devil went to our school. I'll give some background before I tell you the encounters I had. I went to an all-boys boarding school from the age of 8 until just after my 18th birthday. My school was old, and I mean old. It was founded over 450 years ago, back in 1552. To put that into a little context for my American friends, that's 245 years before the USA was even founded. With a place that old, it carries things. As you can probably imagine, I have a lot of stories from my 5 years of service at my school. Feel free to ask any questions. First encounter. The way my schooling worked was perhaps a little confusing to most. You started boarding in junior school at age 8, and then you would be moved to senior school at age 13. My junior school was a relatively new addition to the school, and I never had any paranormal encounters when I was growing up there. My first encounter happened in my first year of senior school. I was 13 and still getting used to my new senior workload, so I felt a little tired and overburdened as I was getting used to my new work schedule. But I was making friends with some of the boys in my year, and things were looking up. At this point, I was probably the smallest boy in my year. I hadn't hit my growth spurt yet, and I wouldn't for a couple more years. The older boys in our schoolhouse would tell us stories of how the school was haunted, and that we should never adventure alone past sunset. My friends and I did not believe them in the slightest. We assumed that they were just playing tricks on the new boys, but we were so wrong. I remember the first time something odd happened. I was quite under the weather and at a high temperature. This was within my first month of moving into the school. My teacher suggested I should take a cold shower. It was late in the evening and showers were usually reserved for the first thing in the morning unless you had PE that day. I remember feeling rather dizzy, and so my friend offered to accompany me. We went down to the shower room together. Having showers at my school was probably the most awkward thing I remember about my time there. One big open room with a dozen or so shower heads. That was a tough thing to get used to when I first started boarding at 8 years old, but I did get used to it rather quickly. I was never really shy about my body or anything like that, but still, there were at least 2.5 dozen boys in my schoolhouse, all crammed together in a completely open, communal shower room. It was awkward to say the least. But back to the point, when my friend and I went down late in the evening, we placed our clothes under a shower head that wasn't going to be used by either of us and got in the shower. The hot water boiler would not have been on at that time in the evening, so my cold shower certainly was cold. After around 5 minutes, my friend and I stood in the freezing cold water. All at once, every unused shower turned on full blast. As well as that, the freezing water suddenly turned boiling hot, like red hot, dangerously so. I'm sure if my friend and I didn't manage to get out of the way of the water before it reached full temperature, we would have been burnt badly. We immediately made a run for the door of the shower room, but it was locked and we couldn't get it opened. We started panicking, as you could imagine. Remember, the scene is 2 naked 13-year-old boys slamming on the shower door with all we could muster. Then, almost as fast as they all started, the showers all stopped. I remember that my heart was racing like it had never raced before. I remember feeling as if I was drowning in steam from the showers. After that, the showers started spurting out something that looked like bright red blood, and I won't ever forget the smell, like rusty metal mixed with sewage. My friend and I were truly cowering at the door by this point. I'll speak for myself when I say that was the scariest thing I'd ever experienced up until that point in my life. Then again, the water stopped and the door unlocked. Our clothes were truly ruined, along with our towels. My teachers were very strict. They could be downright mean. You do not want to be punished at my school. And that's what terrified us more in that moment. We were more scared of being sent to the headmaster's office than we were of whatever event just happened, paranormal or not. So we did our best to clean up, but it didn't work. The room still looked as if a bomb had been dropped. So we went to our head of house and explained what happened, or tried to. He seemed confused, perhaps even slightly scared. He told us to go back to our dorm. The next day, the shower room was closed and we had to use another house's room. As I said, this was probably the first time I experienced something that I cannot explain, whether it was paranormal or not, which personally I'm almost certain it was. How else would all the showers turn themselves on and the door lock itself? This is only one story from my 5 years at my school, and honestly, this is one of the mildest. On to the second encounter. This takes place around 2 months after the last incident with the showers. It was the first Christmas holiday, and most boys were packing up to spend 2 weeks at home with their parents. My parents had already written to me and they said they were too busy for me to come home, so I would be spending the holiday there. I have to admit I was disappointed, but I did as I was told. All of the friends I had made left for the holiday, so I was pretty lonely, but I was enjoying some rest time. For those of you who don't know how most boarding schools in Britain work, we had a 6-day week. We had normal lessons all day from Monday through Saturday, and on Sunday, we had to attend a church service for the first half of the day, meaning we only got one afternoon off to rest in the week, so I spent most of the time I was allowed to in bed reading books. The weird things were more prominent when it was the holidays. It was as if whatever energies were there became braver when there were less people around. In my schoolhouse, around 2.5 dozen boys, but only 4 had stayed for the holiday. Only 1 was the same age as me, and none had stayed from my dorm room, which I have to admit I was thrilled about. Well, I was at first, anyway. The first couple or so nights went fine. I was doing my 13-year-old boy thing, and I won't go into any more detail about that. But after the first days of peace, the weird things started again. At first, it wasn't anything major. Echoes of screams and moans coming from the courtyard. But I rationalized it as older boys playing pranks, but it did scare me. Yet I didn't want to appear weak or fall into the prank, so I slept through my fears and I didn't ask any of the other boys to come and sleep in my dorm with me. So I slept, and when I woke, every other bed in my dorm apart from mine had been moved to the far side of the dorm, which thoroughly freaked me out. But again, I assumed it was a prank from some of the older boys. And if it's one thing I had learned by this point, if you're being pranked or joked on in any way, show no weakness, or it will keep happening. So I moved all the beds back myself, and I went down for a shower. When I got down there was another boy already in the shower room. I can't remember exactly how old he was, but he was in the older years, so probably around 15 or 16. For this story, I'll name him Toby. By this point, I was used to showering with others, so I didn't care that he was there at all. He told me his plan for sneaking down at night and breaking into the dessert kitchen and having a midnight feast. He asked if I wanted to join him, and though I had never done anything against the rules before, he assured me that he had done it loads and had never been caught, so I agreed. Later that day, I got ready in a suit of all black to be able to sneak around more effectively. Toby was just wearing his normal clothes and looked at me like I was a huge nerd when I explained my reasoning for my clothes, and so we started sneaking down to the kitchen. When we got there, we started eating as much ice cream as we could. When suddenly, a whole shelf of tin food threw itself onto the floor and the kitchen doors slammed themselves shut. I looked at Toby in a "what do we do" kind of way. We picked up food and left almost as quickly as we came. Toby and I started walking back towards our schoolhouse. This is the bit that still gives me the chills. We heard footsteps coming up the hall on the way back. We assumed this would be a teacher, but we found somewhere to hide until they had passed. But no one came and we carried on walking back towards our dorm. This is when I felt something grab my leg and yank it. I got back up. We looked around us and there was no one around. We started running because we both were scared when something yanked Toby's leg. He fell, and he fell way worse than I did and banged the front of his head and gave him a bloody nose. He got back up relatively quickly. He was a rugby boy and was used to this kind of thing. By this point, we were sprinting full speed back to our schoolhouse. We got back. We swore we wouldn't speak of what happened again out of fear of getting into trouble. I went to my dorm and tried to get to sleep, but I was terrified of what had just happened. After a couple hours of just laying, I managed to get to sleep. I woke up at some point in the night to my bed, along with the others in my dorm, being slammed into the far side of the room with force. At this point, I was completely over having my own dorm room. I got up and went into Toby's dorm. I explained what happened in my dorm. to someone I thought would understand me. He told me that he knew what I was talking about, and he told me to make a bed in his dorm, and I slept there for the rest of the holiday. On the plus side, Toby looked out for me during the time he was at the school, and we still keep in touch now. The third and final encounter. This event happened in the summer of my first year, meaning I was 14 years old and the school year was almost over. At this point, you've already heard a few of the other events that had transpired. However, nothing had happened in so long that I was beginning to move on from it all. Toby, my friend, would still check up on me from time to time, and we had made a promise that we would come to each other first if we thought anything paranormal was going on. Toby was a very comforting person, and I felt very safe when he was around me. I woke up at 6:30 a.m., and my dorm all headed down to the shower room to get ready for the day. All seemed normal, until we finished showering when we noticed that all of the clothes and towels that we had brought down with us had vanished. Obviously, our first thought was that some of the boys from the older year groups had taken them as a prank, which I suppose is possible, and probably what I would have believed if I didn't know any better. We tried sticking our heads through the shower room door for a bit and shouting that we needed some help, but either no one heard or no one cared enough to help us. And so we were stuck naked in the shower room with no clothes or towels. Eventually my friend, who I will call Peter, volunteered to head out of the shower room and back to our dorm so he could get some clothes for the rest of us. Around 3 minutes after Peter left, we heard the most horrific scream. A scream filled with pain and fear. A scream that echoed through the halls. Us boys didn't know what to do. We still had no clothes and we hoped it was just a mistake and that Peter would stop in a moment. For what felt like an endless 10 seconds, we all froze. Then almost as fast, we snapped back. We ran to our friend. I remember feeling my heartbeat in my throat as we found him collapsed on the floor, trying to drag himself back towards us. The bone in his leg was sticking out of his skin. The moment I saw it, I could feel my head go light. I felt dizzy, and if it wasn't for one of my other friends grabbing me, I think I would have collapsed myself. Peter was still screaming as he looked at us and said 5 words that still sent shivers down my spine. "Get me away from him!" By this point, a group of teachers had found us. We were taken back to our dorm and told to get dressed. The headmaster called us all in for questioning, where we explained what happened, but of course he didn't believe us. His theory was that we thought it would be funny to streak naked around the school after our showers, but since we were wet, Peter slipped and broke his leg. No matter how many times we tried to explain ourselves, he didn't listen. Peter had to go to hospital, and after our punishment period was over, we were allowed to visit him. I asked him what had happened, and he told us that on his way to the dorm, he had seen the devil in our school, and that if we hadn't arrived there in time, that the devil was going to kill him. Having spoken to Peter before writing this post, he still believes that the devil was there at our school that day. After some of the things that I experienced, I have no reason to doubt him. Something that I have noticed while retelling some of my stories, a lot of them have centered around or started in the shower room. Our schoolhouse's shower room was the oldest part of the building, but there was something more to the shower room than that. The stories of things that first and second year boys would be put through in the name of initiations to their house didn't need a paranormal aspect to be horrifying, and those initiations were only officially put a stop to a couple years before I joined the school. Those things being stopped is one of the only things I'm grateful for about my time at boarding school. But what a time it was. Case notes, bonus file. So as I was reading this, my mind was adrift with possibilities of the paranormal, but I never considered the devil. It's interesting to ponder, isn't it? I'm not very religious myself. I consider myself agnostic. I don't know if the devil and God and heaven and which religion would be true or not. I'm open to any possibility though. In this case, do I think it was the actual manifestation of the devil? No, I don't. I don't think the devil, if he exists, would bother with just a plain old boarding school. But I do think if there was a spirit there that was malevolent, or maybe a demon, that they could impersonate the devil. I mean, why not? Who knows if it's even what the devil truly looks like? I mean, we only have our own imaginations to work from, what we think the devil looks like, you know, the red skin and the horns and all that. But whatever was there, clearly was malevolent. Imagine the amount of negative energy required to turn water boiling hot and then into blood and sewage. It's not like he could have crossed some plumbing together and then somehow there's blood in it. There's no blood plumbing as far as I know. So yeah, that's one of the most evil things I've ever heard of. I'm glad you got out of there safely. I think I would have run away.